Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is José Barzola. I am the Conflict and Peace Specialist here at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Today's event is on reflecting on peace from the perspectives of World War II at Jett Zenthoefer and myself. Today's session is co-sponsored not only definitely by the Matsunaga Institute for Peace, as well as the International Business Organization, which is an RIO or student club here at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and then myself, the Conflict and Peace Specialist. Today's session is actually a culmination of Jett is currently pursuing his undergrad certificate in peace studies, and as part of that process, he is required or to do a practicum or an internship. And so through that process, he kind of went on this experience. But today's session, get the opportunity to learn about the many viewpoints on peace education, depending on the perspectives of World War II. It include an in-depth discussion of cross-cultural STEAM perspectives on the current effectiveness of peace education and the future vision of how we can better integrate peace education to everyday life going forward. We'll delve a little bit not only as to peace education throughout Jett's time here at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, his time overseas, um, and then also his practicum that happened this semester. Jett is originally from Centennial, Colorado. He's studying marketing, international business, and economics, as well as pursuing an undergrad certificate in peace studies and a Peace Corps prep certificate with the plan of attending law school after he graduates. Jett's currently the president of the International Business Organization and works closely with the University of Hawaii Study Abroad Center to help encourage students to take opportunities around the world. Um, but a little background as far as I mentioned a little bit about perspectives of World War II. So just to give folks a little insight, Perspectives from World War II, from Hawaii to Nagasaki to Hiroshima, is an experiential program that provides opportunities for students to develop cross-cultural understanding between the multiple perspectives of World War II. During this program, students go on a journey to visit important locations related to the war and have dialogue with folks as means of learning from their lived experience, to learn about the atrocities that occurred during the war, and to be inspired by the stories of resilience from those that survived, as well as those that carry on the message for peace. This immersive program is meant to educate students to learn from past generations to never repeat this tragic part of history. Well, without further ado, I want to turn it over to our speaker today. And we have a couple questions, but please, like I said before, if anyone in the audience has any questions, please add it to the chat. Um, well, Jett, could you tell us a little bit about, what would you say were some of the most important lessons you've taken away regarding peace education for yourself?
Thank you for the really good introduction. That was actually much more in depth than I was expecting. So thank you. This semester I honestly learned more than I was expecting because of just how much was packed into the semester. And I've always uh, been very fascinated by peace education. I've also really just been fascinated with a lot of um, current affairs that happen in the world. As pretty much since like the beginning of middle school, I was really like interested in learning about the conflicts that have been happening in the Middle East throughout the years, and just other, especially recent events that are taking place, are really important to understand as well. But I think the biggest takeaway from this semester, as far as peace, is that I always kind of viewed peace as a end goal or a state that is ideal to be in. When uh, throughout all the discussions I've had this semester, I realized that peace isn't really the end goal. It's more kind of the pathway that we take to the ultimate goal of happiness. Um, because, you know, uh, especially with the contrast between Japan and the United States that I really got to um, focus in depth on this semester, the US and Japan take very different routes, and their goals aren't always to um, obtain peace. It's more of that everyone wants happiness as their end goal. And Japan really puts a focus on peace education, especially in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. But peace education is much more integrated into society there, and they use peace as a pathway to ultimately their end goal of happiness. Whereas the United States focuses a lot more on kind of using military to uh, achieve the goals that we're looking for. And that's not always the case. We have a lot of diplomats that want peaceful solutions, but um, overall, there's more aggressive and peaceful routes towards obtaining peace. The other thing that I learned is that everyone views peace very differently, especially when I was talking about what peace actually is. And when I was in Japan, I didn't realize that there's so many different personal definitions. For me, like I said earlier, I viewed it as an end goal, but people there really see it as something that's just a way of life and kind of how you ultimately get to your goals further than peace. Uh, and then also, when discussing peace, you would think that speaking your part, especially from a point of view of someone who lives in the United States, saying your part and kind of using speech as your way of expressing yourself is seen as really important here. But I found throughout this semester that listening is just as important. It's really something where uh, you need to understand how everyone else feels to really understand how to make a peaceful solution. So actively listening and really engaging with what people are telling you, and not just uh, not just trying to hear what they say, but really understand it and then integrate it into your own thinking is really important. So those are kind of like the biggest takeaways that I've really tried to integrate into how I go about my everyday life. And it's something that is really difficult, especially when I was so used to thinking in a specific way. But this semester has really taught me that I need to kind of be open to hearing other people's perspectives just as much as understanding my own.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those insights. So considering that students have historically played a big role in like social movements in history, uh, how can current individual students interested in peace education start to become more involved in advocating for peace?
Yeah, it's especially lately as we've seen with some of the big events that are happening in the world. There's several methods that I think a lot of students really see as being valid. One of them is protesting, and I would agree it's one way of doing things. I think another that's more personal for individual students who aren't really sure how to get involved or are a little intimidated is just taking the time to kind of learn about world events that are happening and really understand what exactly their position is on it. um, it's also uh, when you first get involved in peace education, it's really easy to take a huge overview and see, have an end goal of a very broad definition of what you see as a solution. And for the most part, realistically, one student, it's really hard to make your voice big enough to make a very drastic change in society. So I think that a good step, especially from a very basic point of view, is to identify problems in your own community. So just like pick a small problem in your community, and that's a really good way to kind of learn how you can start to use your voice, and it will also introduce you to other like-minded people. The other thing is when you first initiate a conversation about peace studies, it is kind of scary. It's something where you really have to put yourself out there with what you believe, especially if you um, have a point of view that other people don't necessarily completely understand. So you have to not be afraid to bring your own ideas into a conversation and really um, not feel the need to explain yourself to other people, but be willing to uh, listen to how other people feel about your opinion, as well as kind of support what you're trying to say. So overall, it's for students that want to get involved. I would say start small. Think about where you actually are. Think about the issues that you see in your own community, and then that's a really good way to kind of start getting more involved and really learn about how you can use your voice.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So you went into this a little bit, but regarding how did your time spent overseas possibly impact your perspective on peace education? But furthermore, I wanted to kind of delve a little further into your positionality as a white male. Um, I don't know if that ever came up in your travels and how, just sharing how exactly was that experience for you? and what maybe you learned about it as it relates to peace education or peace building.
Yeah, absolutely. It is something that comes up, especially in society where um, race kind of plays a big part in how people see you, unfortunately. I think that it is something that a lot of people identify strongly with, especially in places such as Hawaii. It comes up almost on the daily. And for for me, it is a difficult subject to kind of work around sometimes, but I think it's a lot less difficult when you really are just respectful and willing to learn about other people. I think for me, I'll talk about my time overseas in a couple minutes, but the first part that I wanted to share is just kind of an experience that came up relatively recently regarding this. One thing that I noticed when I came to Hawaii, this was kind of a game that is still very uncomfortable for me, but there were situations where when I first met people, especially during my freshman year, there was I would meet students who were from Hawaii, and one of the games that people like to play, in fact, I don't even necessarily know if I see it as a game, but it's something that people talked about was um, like, guess what ethnicity you are. And for me, especially as a white male who doesn't necessarily understand a lot of things that could be taken the wrong way, that game was really uncomfortable for me, and I just chose not to partake in the conversation at all because my answers would unfortunately just come from stereotypes that I've heard, and that's not something that's always the most respectful or right to use in those situations. So when I got into situations where that type of thing came up, such as one of the events that the International Business Organization put on recently called the Passport Fair, I was listening to someone's presentation about Argentina, which is a country that we have a study abroad program to. And I was listening to her presentation, and she would say certain words that really you can kind of tell that she has an accent and really knows how to uh, say things in like the culturally correct way. And from that, I asked if she had family that lived there, and uh, she said, "Oh, like, do I look Hispanic to you?" And I was like, in Hawaii, you really can't just assume that. That's something where there's like it's so diverse here and so such complex ethnic identities here that it's not something that you can just assume. So um, I kind of just I told her that I noticed that she says some of the words that she was talking about in a very specific way, and I think it's really cool. And that instead changed the situation for me making an assumption about who she is into me asking more about her background. Like I want to learn, and it turns it into a situation where they really want to share it. They're excited that I'm showing interest, and it makes it so that it turns into a situation where instead of making an assumption or use some stereotype that I know, I'm allowing them to share with me and teach me about themselves. So it makes it so that identifying situations like that aren't quite as uncomfortable or awkward, especially when I don't necessarily know what I'm talking about. Um, and then as far as the time that I spent overseas, I definitely got into some, I wouldn't say I got into some uncomfortable situations. I got put into positions where I wasn't expecting it and it really caught me off guard. And the one that really sticks out to me to share right now, especially, is when I spent some time in Morocco, which is a place where there are a lot of tourists, but there's also a lot of areas that are not necessarily explored by people who aren't from there. And so, being a student who did not have a lot of money, a lot of the hostels or like hotels that you stay in are in very local areas. In fact, the one that I stayed in was $7 a night, and that doesn't get you very much. And it also puts you in some areas that aren't quite so nice. But there's very nice people there. And I first checked in at the hostel that I stayed in Rabat, Morocco, which is not very touristy. It's not a city that's made for tourists, but it is the capital of Morocco. And I got there, and the guy that checked me in was super nice, and he had a long beard, and you could definitely tell that he was like mixed from Middle Eastern and then also Morocco, and One of the things that he said to me that just really caught me off guard because when you check into those places, they ask for your passport. So he knew that I was from the United States, and one of the things he said is that he was really happy that I didn't come there and just automatically assume he's a terrorist. And such a straightforward thing to just have someone say to you and assume that that's how you view them. And one, it kind of broke my heart that that's the first thing that he would think that I would think about him. But from that, it ended up turning into something that was really cool because I told him like, no, that's absolutely not like, why would I ever assume that? And I asked him where's some good places to go get dinner after that, and he he said, "Oh, here, I'll walk with you and show you a restaurant." And he took me to a Syrian restaurant, which is something that I had never experienced, and it had good food for the record. So if you ever get the chance, try it. But he took me there, and then he ended up paying for my dinner and sitting down with me, and we just talked, and it was this really cool experience that all started from uh, me coming in and him thinking that I saw him in such a drastic and like quite terrible way, really. And it ended up turning into something where I really learned and something where he kind of see that, oh, not everybody will see him that way. So I think that you know my time overseas really taught me about how people may view me right off the bat, and it taught me kind of my place in the world and how I need to understand that people see me so that I can grow and make sure that uh, I can use my voice to make sure that those types of feelings aren't shared in places because what we say in the United States, even though we don't see the people really directly that we're talking about, our voices reach them. And as unfortunate as that can be in a lot of ways, it's something that can also be really powerful when we use it in the right
Thank you. Thank you for your thoughtfulness. And just sharing about your experiences. I also want to just point out, thank you for using United States and not America. I know that's been a conversation we've had
way.
over the
Yeah,
semester, especially being someone who was born in Peru, and I'm always like, well, everyone in North and South America is technically American, but there is a bit of prestige that comes along with someone coming from the US being like, oh, I don't need to say United States of America. It's just one word is more than sufficient to identify a whole community. So thank you for your thoughtfulness and kindness. We have a comment from the audience. I appreciate your open mind and heart, Jet. How do you personally remain open-hearted and mind when your values are challenged or you experience conflict?
yeah, it's kind of hard. Uh, I think keeping an open heart in itself is kind of the answer. Like, uh, it's really important to understand, especially someone who comes from kind of a more, um, I guess, privileged way of life. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but I've been very fortunate with what I've had throughout my life. And keeping an open heart, I want to go into places and allow them to see that I view the situation as me being a guest where they are. And I don't want to go in and impose how I feel. And, part of what really ends up happening is when my values are challenged, I have to swallow my pride. It's not, that's the most straightforward way of how it is. And that's really tough for a lot of people, especially in the United States where we have a lot of pride in who we are and where we're from and the power of our home country. But that's not how other people see it. And it's not something that I was very good at first. It definitely, I think the moment where I really became super humbled all of a sudden was when I moved to Hawaii and was plunged into a situation where I was no longer part of the majority of the population. And it made me realize, I I'm not the person who runs the place where I'm living. I really have to just, go in and realize that I have to learn about the people that are around me, and that's okay. I think it's something that um, takes a lot of time to learn. It's not easy, but once you do, you really see the beauty in the rest of the world. And um, there are going to be people who I think don't necessarily have what it takes to swallow their pride, unfortunately, which is why I think we see a lot of the issues that are in the United States, especially. Um, but for me, it really just comes down to feeling the need to understand the people that I'm meeting, and just especially like when I was in Morocco, I was not in a position where I had any other choice. So really taking those opportunities to put yourself in situations where you're going to be forced to be uncomfortable and be forced to pretty much be at the mercy of the situation. Like that's just what it takes. You got to take those opportunities to experience new things and um, realize that the world is not full of your own value. Everyone is going to have different perspectives on myself and where I'm from. Sorry, I don't know if that was the right answer
No,
to the
no, no.
question, but
Thank you. There is no right or wrong answer. It is really, and I appreciate you for being open, and I appreciate you for really just leaning into your discomfort. I mean, we talk about it so much. I think there is a certain sense of humility that comes with knowing you. I recall, I forget how many years back now. I think it your first year, I think, at the university. We met via Zoom during, Zoom school because it might
that
have
was
been.
my sophomore year, second year.
Sophomore year. Okay, so it was your second year. Okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, just it kind of just transpired in your I mean, honestly, we were meeting about the Peace Corps prep certificate, which is what you were
Yeah.
interested in
Yeah.
initially. And so already that was like I'm like, okay, this person's different than most folks who's willing to even just contemplate giving up 2 years of, their life just to like go be sent wherever and assist communities. So thank you for, you know, coming
Yeah.
into the
No,
work, if
thank you.
anything.
Thank you.
Um, but so some additional questions here. Seeing as how you place an importance on learning about peace from different perspectives, what type of peace education system do you think would be beneficial?
Yeah. So for a long time, I kind of pondered this question, and I realized that there isn't a simple solution because if there was, it probably would have already been thought of. But for the most part, especially over even back when I was a sophomore and really started learning or getting involved in peace education, I kind of always viewed that like having a standard peace education system that all the countries used would be a good answer, or like a good peace education system for people to use. But as I've kind of traveled around and especially when Yumi and I went to Japan back in February, I realized that there's a lot of value that comes from having different views on peace. If everyone had the same view, I don't really believe that there would be quite as much of a enriched understanding of what the world actually needs in terms of creating peaceful solutions. So I think overall having the peace education system uh, it definitely needs to be increased in a lot of places, such as the United States, where I didn't really have any mentions of peace in my curriculum until I came to college and actively chose for it to be part of what I'm learning. But having a very diverse peace education system where each country kind of teaches about their own perspective is really important. And I think that there a lot could be said for, particularly what I know about in the United States is if started teaching things, adding in more perspectives into peace education. Um, for example, in Colorado, where I'm from, we teach a lot about United States history um, and even world history. But in Colorado, we learn about things like the gold rush and westward expansion, which is really great. But one of the things that always gets left out is the Native American perspective. So and in Hawaii, the native Hawaiian perspective gets left out when we talk about World War II a lot of the time. So I think in terms of actually enriching the peace education system, it would be to include more perspectives and standardization doesn't need to be a part of it. It just needs to include more perspectives. Yeah, that's my best answer.
No, thank you. Thanks so much for that. So, so shifting a little bit to the perspectives of World War II program that you've partaken in for the past 5 months, and thank you so much for agreeing to go on this journey, which may have been somewhat laid forward, but then things kind of, evolved as opportunities came up. What did you learn from your journey in the Perspectives of World War II program that, just anything that kind of comes to mind that you'd love to share with the audience today?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that really stood out to me is being from the United States, Pearl Harbor is really kind of taught about when it comes to World War II. Like that's one of the focal points that starts most World War II discussions in the United States. And we take that as something that we feel pride about defending now. And when I went to Japan and we learned about the atomic bomb, I realized that a lot of the people there, while theirs was on a much larger scale than what happened at Pearl Harbor, people are hurting on both sides, and the people who are hurting are not necessarily the people who are always fighting the battles. A lot of what happened in World War II and the most important stories of peace are the ones that came from the people who were just bystanders to the actual battles that were happening. And there's a lot to be said for learning from those people. Uh, the other really important thing is uh, this was something that came up actually when I was visiting Auschwitz concentration camp in Europe, and I went and took a tour, and they simply showed us around. You know, they show us around the actual concentration camps, and um, this is separate kind of from the practicum that I did this semester. But one of the things that really stuck out to me at the end of the tour was they they said even though there are many sides to this story, and you don't know where you would have fallen during that time, you can't really pass judgment on the decisions that were made. You don't know what you would have done in these situations, and people were just acting in their best interest, and people had no control of the situation. So to say that you would go into it and do things differently isn't really possible unless you were actually in the situation. And the best thing that we can do now is not talk about if what happened was right or not, but talk about what could be done differently next time, or how we think that things could have been carried out differently and where we would be now in terms of how we actually view the situation. So I think that really what needs to happen now is have discussions of how we can make sure that um, really big tragedies don't happen again. Instead of focusing on what happened in the past, it's still good to remember it, but now it's time to grow from it, and really think about what we can do differently to make sure bad things don't happen again.
Thank you. And I think something further for that is that making sure and you kind of alluded to this earlier about um, providing space for all the voices, all the stories that unfortunately our history books and our education does not cover.
Yeah,
Because many times, those history books and the education is written by those that colonize and won or took over, and those that remain to be seen many times don't have a voice in that. So definitely creating space to uplift those voices and always be conscientious of, well, what are we not covering? Where are the pukas, where are the holes in this story? And I'll share, yes, we learned about Pearl Harbor and we learned about Nagasaki perspective and the Hiroshima perspective, even the Japanese American or Japanese Nisei veteran experience and Japanese migration. But I know there's more. I mean, there's and it's a constantly evolving project where or program that, all I kept thinking was like, I want to be able to add that, Filipino perspective, the Native Hawaiian perspective, especially being here in Hawaii. And because there isn't like a museum or an actual building, so it's a matter of searching through the archives and finding those stories to be able to share with folks. So
Yeah.
so yeah, so thank you. Um, how did your so this is not an easy, you talked about going to Auschwitz, you talked about, Nagasaki, Hiroshima, Pearl Harbor, places that hold lots of tragedy. Obviously, it's very different today than what it was at the moment, but and I know in preparation for this, I gave you a heads up, this may be an emotional experience, and kind of gave you some previous talk stories to kind of prepare for these. And um, so how do you make sure to have like the mental space and energy to hear the stories and process the experience you've had over the past few months, or even over, Auschwitz, that was about a year ago now. So I don't know if you have any um, guidance or on that.
Yeah. I think, you know, I think, at least from personal experience, there really isn't a way to prepare for everything that you're going to see. And I think, especially with how we talk about leaning into discomfort, that's okay that there's not a way to prepare for it. I think a lot of the people who become really inspired by these stories, and that really choose to become inspired and make changes that they believe in are people who kind of experience a shock factor from some of these things. Uh, to go into it and be completely prepared for what you're going to see is just something that, you know, I don't really think that that's necessarily possible. There's no way to get rid of the weight that's carried by a lot of these monuments and important places and stories such as the ones that we heard from the hibakusha in Japan. Those are things that are really, you shouldn't go into it and be prepared for. It's something that should give a lot of personal growth and be something that is seen as a pretty extreme example of some of the hard things that can happen in history. So um, I didn't necessarily go in with a lot of, um, you know, mental techniques to make sure that I'm prepared to hear hard stories. Um, in fact, for me, it really came down to making sure that I'm going into it with an open mind and understand that it is going to be hard and that there are going to be moments where I'm extremely uncomfortable, especially with like my family background and my family's involvement in the military. If I go into it and I'm okay with everything that I'm seeing, then I'm not going to necessarily grow in the way that I need to. So going into it and just, being understanding that it's going to be hard, that I'm going to feel uncomfortable, and that I am going to have to learn from what I'm about to hear is part of, I think, what did make me prepared to grow from the experience. And especially when we were meeting the hibakusha in Japan. Um, this is something that's pretty extreme, but my grandfather was heavily involved in making the decision to drop the atomic bombs on Japan. So going into this and hearing the stories from the hibakusha, I was pretty terrified, especially when we were going up to shake the hibakusha's hand in Nagasaki. It was a moment where I felt some shame. I felt confused. I felt afraid. I felt inspired by the story. And like overall, I came out of it feeling really empowered and feeling like with what I'm being given in my education, it's time for me to make a change and not necessarily fix what happened in the past, but make sure that my voice is being used on the right side, and not even the right side, but on the side that I believe in, which is the peaceful solutions being the best path. And so to get back to the question, there wasn't mental preparation that went into it. I felt that I needed the shock and the really like harsh reality check kind of that comes from hearing about a lot of these things.
Thank you. Thank you so much. One of our audience folks has a question. Were there any changes after you returned from Japan? What is your plan for the next step?
Yeah, there were some big changes after coming back from Japan. Um, I know it was mentioned earlier that I'm going to go to law school um, after I finish up my undergraduate here. And my initial plan was to go to New York or Washington, D.C. or Georgia for law school. And when I came back to Hawaii from Japan, I realized that really the only place that would be good for me to go to school is here because I'm one really inspired by what I learned in Japan, and two, I feel like it's really kind of the area where I want to focus. The resources that I've been given throughout my education and my voice that I'm feeling very empowered in using. I feel that the best place to do it is here in Hawaii. And so I was recently, just last week, accepted into the UH Law School as well. So there's a 99% chance that I'll be staying here for another 3 to 4 years. So definitely a big change, and it completely shifted my focus, and I realize now that my voice is best used here.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Um, So after coming back from Japan, we engaged in many activities in Hawaii, such as the Sadako Peace Project, which I know you've been involved in the past as well. The Hawaii Peace Forum, where we got to present alongside Hiroshima High School students and some local students here from Hawaii, and Legacy to Action over through the 100th Infantry Battalion. Can you share any thoughts or lessons you took away from those experiences?
Yeah. When I came back from Japan, I definitely gained a perspective on changes that I want to see in the world. And it was and still is very broad. I have like my big dream vision of how I want peace education to be really important in everyone's lives. Um, but I realize that that's a very extreme and fairly unrealistic perspective for just one person to have. And getting involved in these smaller projects, um, it made me really see the value in focusing on some of the smaller community issues that I'm noticing. It doesn't always have to be about fixing the whole entire world. A lot of it is just making the community where you are a better place. Especially with the Legacy to Action project, which um, I still had trouble narrowing down my focus, but seeing so many of the students around me focusing on really important issues that they realize that are in the community, it really brings light to how just one person's voice can make such a big change in the community, and how you don't necessarily need to um, let me rephrase that. You don't necessarily have to use your voice in the whole entire world. Sometimes the most important space to really focus on is where you are right now. That can lead to bigger things, and even if it doesn't, you know that you are making a change in the community that you really care about. So um, more than anything, it's taught me just there's value in working on the community that.
Thank you, and I appreciate you for your patience as we moved into different spaces and met different folks. Can you maybe share a little bit about lately I've been asking this question about any lessons you may have learned from a loved one when you were younger that you still carry on today, that guides you in some capacity?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this question, and it's really hard. I was very fortunate to have um, two parents who really allowed me to kind of learn what my perspectives are on my own. Uh, when I was growing up, there was no religion in our house. My parents didn't even talk about it until each of my siblings and I kind of decided for ourselves what was right. They didn't talk about politics because in society, especially in the United States, a lot of kids end up having very similar political opinions to their parents, and that was another thing that we didn't talk about until, like for me, I came up with my own viewpoints, and I still couldn't really narrow that down to a lesson that they taught me, besides just learning how to make decisions and hone in my own understanding. But one of the things that my mom especially really always taught me is that talking is always a better solution than fighting, especially for younger kids. That's something that is good to teach them, because you always hear like parents telling their kids, "Oh, don't hit your brother, or don't hit your sister," and that's definitely um, something that I've carried with me for as long as I've been alive. I've always believed in talking to people when I have an issue, and it always ends better than me picking a fight with them. So I think that the most important thing that I learned is just that, um, you know, sitting down and having a conversation, even if it's uncomfortable or hard, or even if you go into it and you kind of feel like you're going to be wrong, that's okay. It's something where, um, you know, you're picking a peaceful solution rather than an aggressive solution. So, um, there's always merit to taking a peaceful side, even if it's something where you might come out uncomfortable and also might not be right. It's okay to not always be right, and it's okay to make compromise rather than having an absolute win or an absolute lose. There is almost always an answer that will make both sides at least slightly better off than they would be if they um, lose.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I could see how the conversations and the leaning to your discomfort are definitely something you, I mean, as you shared, you still do today. So thank you for doing
Yeah,
that. One thing I always love to kind of, as we're not quite closing off yet, but I love to talk about what brings you joy. How do you practice, how do you practice self-care? Because I know you're juggling many things.
yeah. It's to be completely honest, I'm not that good at practicing self-care, and I think that that's something that's kind of common for a lot of people. There's always going to be not getting enough sleep, not drinking enough water, not taking time for yourself, and those are all things that I'm guilty of. Um, I think for me though, the most important thing that I always not even always try, but just something that is such an important part of my life is making sure that I'm always connecting with the people that I care about, and being in a community where I feel like I can always say what's on my mind, or feel like it's okay to disagree with people. I know that that's not necessarily like a personal mental technique, but it's something that I feel is really important, because when I'm put in a like kind of a lifestyle where I always feel a sense of comfort from the people that I'm around, and that I feel that I have the ability to um, ask for help, or feel that it's okay to be wrong around these people, or feel that in every situation they're going to be willing to work with me or compromise, or just um, explain very clearly to me how they view what I'm saying. It makes it so that I feel like I always have support from the people I'm around. So there's never really a time where I feel like I'm stuck in a situation where I'm mentally unwell, or that I have to go through whatever I'm facing alone. And um, especially, uh, or this was something that was also hard for me to come up with an answer to. I thought about the parts of my life that make everything that I do a lot easier, such as being the president of the International Business Organization. We have 113, 115 members. That's a lot of people. But the reason that I'm able to do it is because I have 10 other people on my team that become my best friends when we work together. So, like, it's not like I'm doing it on my own. It's not like I'm trying to plan all these events on my own. I have people that I talk to every single day that make it possible. So I think what makes me feel that I can be mentally healthy and mentally well and not feel just completely drained all the time is just having a community of people that I trust and that, I mean, for lack of better words, a group of people that I can be wrong around and have it be okay.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Um, I wonder if you have any words of wisdom for future students going through a practicum. Um, so this practicum is for folks may have not caught it earlier. It's through the Matsunaga for Peace. It's a PACE or PACHE 495 course. So yeah, just wondering for any future practicum students, any guidance you may have.
Yeah, I think for me, it was kind of initially put into my mind as being an internship, I guess you could say. And from what I've realized, the most important part of this whole experience for me has been what I've learned. For me, it was structured as kind of more of a very field work focused uh, course, I guess you could say. And so I felt that I was always learning, but it wasn't just a setting where I'm sitting in a classroom and um, watching lectures or something like that. Like I was talking to leaders and professors and other students with really diverse backgrounds. So I think um, picking a practicum that's going to challenge you and put you in situations where you are going to be uncomfortable, such as when Yumi and I went to Japan, like I grew so much from that trip, and it kind of completely shifted my whole focus on what I want to do for my career. And it all came from just being willing to be uncomfortable and like I'm not saying even go on a trip, but just put yourself in a situation where you know that you're going to have to learn. Make it something that you're not necessarily already super knowledgeable about what you're learning. It's the point of it isn't to go in and be the best at what you're doing. The point of it is to go in and really learn from it and be challenged as a person.
Thank you, Jet. Well, I don't know if you have any questions, but and you're like, I haven't thought about that, but it's quite okay. If anything, I just really want to say thank you so much for your thoughtfulness, compassion, empathy that you gave as you engaged in this Perspectives of World War II program these past few months. I very much appreciated your curiosity to learn more about those untold stories. And I do hope you keep those stories alive by sharing them with others as you progress in your journey and, you know, wherever your peace building journey takes you. It's truly how we can make sure not to repeat history, as you mentioned. And this is by educating others about the stories of the oppressed. So thank you so much for your time today.